I don't think AI per se is unsafe. Not at all. AI can be absolutely made safe. Many of these companies are the equivalent of blank, literally a naked emperor type style thing, where if they don't pay attention, they will walk into massive troubles. And open AI consumed through Azure.
Mm-hmm.
You know what the token cost per month is for that company? North of $4 million.
Today I sit down with Dorian Selz. Dorian built local.ch into Switzerland's #1 local search platform in just 4 years. Co-founder and CEO of Squirro, a leading enterprise AI company working with highly regulated industries like finance and healthcare. Expert in AI, RAG, NLP, and enterprise search. We discuss the hidden risks of enterprise AI and why trust, safety, and accountability will define the next decade of innovation. Make sure to subscribe and follow on your favorite podcast app and YouTube. If something in this discussion resonates with you, drop a comment and share your thoughts. I would love to hear your perspective. And now, enjoy the conversation. Welcome, Dorian, to An Hour of Innovation. Thank you for your time today.
Hello, nice to have me. Thank you, Vit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very timely to have you and have this conversation about regulations in AI and things like that. But before we jump into the topic, can you tell a little bit about your background and what your company does?
Sure. Squirro is an enterprise generic company. We make these language models applicable and usable in an enterprise context by providing an enhanced RAG solution that ensures scalability, security, accuracy, reliability that enterprises need to deploy these type of technologies in the context of use cases where the enterprise depends on tangible outcomes.
Okay, thank you. So to start off, why don't we start with this question of what could potentially go wrong if AI doesn't have any guardrails?
Maybe your viewers and listeners have picked that up. Last weekend, Anthropic came out with a report of them being misused, their platform being misused for the probably first large-scale AI attack. Now, this is Anthropic. This is thousands of engineers working day and night on such a platform. In an enterprise setup where people deploy a technology with less resources, less people, they need to be absolutely sure that what they deploy is working within limits, within guardrails. Else, they essentially put their company at risk. I just come out of a workshop with a very exclusive executive headhunter here in Switzerland, Roy Hitchman. They select people for boards of the SMI, that's sort of the equivalent to the FTSE 100 index here in Switzerland for the boards and C-levels. And I saw a board level survey they did where the majority, by about 70% of all board members, believe they know enough to be able to judge, as an example, the security aspects of AI in their businesses. And frankly speaking, I had to laugh out loud. That's a bit the same like the majority of people believe that they're better drivers than the average, which is technically impossible. So what I see here at the moment is an opening gap between, yes, the usefulness of these technologies, but on the other side of that same coin, an opening wider, ever bigger margin of security threats where many of these companies are the equivalent of blank, literally a naked emperor type style thing, where if they don't pay attention, they will walk into massive troubles where the good old, I go and encrypt your entire SharePoint for a ransom payment is minuscule in comparison.
Yeah, that's very concerning. Many people still very optimistic. They don't think about risks. Like, I guess with all new technologies that happened in the history, right? First, people like experiment a lot and don't think about the consequences, I guess, too much. So you work in the highly regulated industry in finance and healthcare and like that. So what are some of the challenges in enterprises and highly regulated industries that new startups that try to enter those spaces don't yet understand?
I'll give you an example. We work for some of the central banks here in Europe. That's publicly known. One can research that. They don't openly talk about that, but it's publicly known information. Any central bank has one thing they can bring to the table: trust. You trust the central bank because what they do is for the benefit of all, to create a stable currency setup. If it's not trustworthy, you have issues on the currency front like Argentina has.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here in Europe, we are luckily in a situation where our currencies, be it the Swiss francs here in Switzerland or the euro, are good, solid currencies. So any such institution will pay a premium for ensuring that this trust is maintained. Now, let's look at that on one level down. What do these regulators do? They, of course, set, say, the monetary conditions and policies, interest rates, but the same central banks also have a supervisory obligation. So they look and check at the banks that operate within their purview. And for that, they obviously need to see documentation from these banks that goes all the way up to the board level, minutes about how, say, a commercial bank sets their credit facilities compared to their balance sheet, and so on and so on. This in itself is superbly secure data that you under no circumstance ever want to have in the open, because it would undercut, obviously, the commercial bank, but even more so, it would undercut the trust into the central bank and the regulator. So, number one, corollary of that, these organizations will only work with someone they can themselves fully trust. And that takes years to build trust. It takes one incident to lose that trust. So as a IT vendor, whether you do Gen AI or traditional, I don't know, networking equipment, it does not matter. You need to have a track record of dependability. You need to be trustworthy towards these institutions. Number one. Number two, if you have sort of stepped over that obstacle and you're deemed trustworthy, and the moment you go inside such a bank, you obviously have to operate within that domain. That is, you need to operate securely, you need to operate in a fashion whereby every of your steps is monitored, is audited, where your software, as an example, is constantly also checked and monitored for deficiencies, where you need to kind of like produce reliable environments, the whole life cycle of software deployment, software operation, software maintenance and upkeep, etc. All of that is maybe not even remotely close to your core value proposition. But without sort of that guardrail in itself, you're not a partner for these institutions. And I think many maybe younger companies with maybe a bit less exposure to these type of environments underestimate the fact that in these environments I described, it's not necessarily so much the absolute latest cutting edge that matters to be the shiny object that people run after and say, yeah, how great that is. But it is a matter of fact, the operational dependability and reliability that it can bring to the table. And with that, you need to find now a good balance, right? Between how far you push the envelope to quote, as an example, chat with all of your supervisory data, but do that at the same time in a reliable fashion. Where, give you an example. if you want to chat with your data in such an environment where you have absolute rigid Chinese walls between the different sections of that institutions for good reason, because it's so delicate information, you need, as an example, to understand how you do permission enablement in a vectorized index at scale, which is everything but easy. So what I want to say with that is, yes, indeed, it looks so trivial from the outside to, as an example, build a GenA application. Bit of open source here, bit of open source there, bit of data, here we go. I have my startup. But between that and really at scale do these kind of things is a massive difference. I sometimes compare that, back in the days when I was a kid, 10, 12, 15 years old, we built these little box cars to run them down Little Hill. No motor, simply, a box with 4 wheels, and obviously in the next a car, if you crash the whole thing into the woods. It was a car. But between that car and the car that runs on a German highway with 200 kilometers an hour, that's also a box with 4 wheels. But everything else is different, right?
Yeah.
And that's about the same kind of like difference in what you need to be able to accomplish to be working in these and operating in these environments.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess, especially for the highly regulated environments, it's really necessary to understand all those details and make sure that, like, new fintech comes in, they have all the bells and whistles to covered for that. And to build trust, like you said, it takes a lot of time. I totally agree. So with all that said, do you think AI is unsafe today?
I don't think AI per se is unsafe. Not at all. AI can be absolutely made safe, right? But there is a difference between safe as in real safe and as in perceived safe, right? What I want to lay out here, to make AI safe, give you an example, you need to have an end-to-end observability and auditability, where you are really able to prove out for every step from data ingestion all the way to the tangible outcome that you produce, and every step in between, what happened, what did you do, how did you transform data, what was exposed to an LLM, what was the response to that, was that response verified, all the rest of it. Now, in a race that at the moment happens, whereby obviously for all of us in that domain, there is such a noisy space, you're often measured rather for features than for security. There is an inherent incentive to maybe take a shortcut on the security element, because it's not something that in most cases sells today. It will in 2 years' time, right? There are a number of other Anthropic level attacks. But in the initial steps now, it was, can I compete with Copilot, say, in a vertical niche? Where the feature set was more important than the underlying security architecture. And obviously, inadvertently with that, both sides, the buyer as well as the seller, create an environment where both effectively inadvertently create gapping security holes that they will need eventually to catch up and close. And the analogy here I use, maybe again for your viewers and listeners, is commercial airliners. It's inherently unsafe for any human being to be on 10,000 meters altitude or 30,000 feet over the open Atlantic Ocean. Why do we do that without even thinking twice? Because technically speaking, an airplane today is safer, taking you as an example, I sit now in Zurich, to, I believe you're on the West Coast, right?
East Coast.
East Coast, taking you to New York as an example on the East Coast. It's safer with a plane than if I go with a car from Zurich to Bern, which is literally just 150 kilometers down the highway. Why? Because 80 years of stringent regulation by the Federal Aviation Authority in the US made those machines extremely safe. Right? And that simply obviously we have not 80 years of AI. We have 2, 3, 4, 5 years in the public domain of AI. Now, will it take 80 years to get as a safe AI system like a jumbo jet taking you from Zurich to the East Coast? Maybe not. But it will take more than a simple 2, 3 years of this type of revolution.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, we need to have some guardrails and rules so everybody play by them to make it a little bit predictable, safe, right? So there is another, I guess, maybe misconception or at least topic I want to clarify for everybody is how to manage risk and insurance in this industry. And some people maybe don't understand how insurances work and how companies leverage that to like distribute risk and manage risk and everything. Mm-hmm. Maybe you can elaborate on this a little bit to educate listeners.
We, that is you, Vit, and I, when we prepared this podcast, we stumbled upon this piece. We talked about regulation, right? In most minds, especially in our industry, regulation is bad, freedom of movement is good. And my point to you was this, I think, overlooks a basic fact of how economies, how companies operate today in a capitalistic system. There is no single company out there, maybe outside the mom and pop shop, that operates without liability insurance, right? Yeah. And the liability insurance does not only cover that I coincidentally break the glass of a customer when I go and visit them and I'm jubilant because they give me a contract and I throw my bag against the window and it breaks. No, liability, professional liability insurance today often also covers, for, as an example, professional mistakes I may make that would possibly cause harm on the customer side. Then there are these director and officers insurances, right? Whereby you're covered for risks with relation to your C-level position or your board level position. In all of these contracts, there are stipulations about that you need to declare what type of risks you expose your company to so that the insurance company knows what they insure for. Why do you need to do that? So that the insurance company is able to set the premium at the right level. You as a company do not want to pay fortunes for that insurance with maybe a cap of a couple of $1,000,000 should harm happen being paid out. But you want to obviously pay a fair amount, or better say from a company's perspective, the least possible amount. Now let's switch to the insurance side. Will an insurance accept a policy that they insure, say, for 10 million professional liability, me as a organization, as a company, if the insurance company knows that, as an example, let's suppose I'm in I'm in a restaurant business, that AI suddenly manages my food safety. With AI having zero track record on managing my food safety. I, as an insurance, would flat out refuse. Why? Because if I don't know what the risk is that I insure, I must assume that I am kind of like will need to pay out that damage without knowing what happened. And if it happens once, maybe I don't go under as an insurance, but an insurance only makes money if they have to pay out less than what they cash in as premiums, right? So they have an inherent interest to ensure that the risks on the company side that take out those insurances are limited. And I can guarantee you, in the renewal cycles that will come up over the next 2-3 years, anyone with a D&O insurance, anyone with a other professional liability insurance will need to answer, do you employ AI? And if so, what do you use it for? And if the insurance sees this, they will either exclude that risk or they impose on you that you declare openly what you do to be able to get the coverage for that risk. And that in itself will be, I think, in the mid to long term, as a forceful driver to create secure and reliable AI, as whatever governments will impose. because, and that's important for listeners and viewers, if a company cannot shift some of these risks off their balance sheet, they implicitly carry those risks on their own balance sheets. And unintentionally or intentionally, an employee causing harm to a company can take that company all the way to bankruptcy. And that is an unacceptable risk, if I now switch again the sides, for me as a company owner.
Right.
So in the way we organize our societies, there is an elaborate game of shifting risks around, pooling risks so as to, when those risks occur, you do not as an individual go down, but as a society can manage that. Example in the US for our listeners are those hurricane insurances, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or example over here in Europe as well for listeners are, as an example, by the way, the same is actually true for the US, are the liability insurances that you need to take out for your cars, right?
Yeah.
So that at the end of the day is, I think, what will happen. And I think it's a good thing because it will force vendors like ours to do the right thing and focus not just on the latest and greatest bells and whistles, aka features, but fundamentally produce good, reliable AI solutions.
Yeah, that's a good example. I think as insurances learn more about businesses and those failures keep happening and they create big problems, they will start paying attention. uh, but then also I have a follow-up question is, when this incident happened, who do you think, or maybe it's still an open debate, who should be responsible? Should it be responsible the LLM model creator or user or the company who used that service? What do you think?
I always forget which paragraph it is in the American Code of Law. If you're a postal service, you're not responsible for what you carry in the postal service. So if I go to US Post Office and send a package to you, Vit, and the package contains whatever poisonous, nefarious stuff, I'm going to be responsible, not the US Postal Service for carrying it all the way to you and maybe causing harm to you. Not that I ever wish to do that, but in that example, right? And there is a certain paragraph in the US Code of Law. And by the way, the same goes for internet companies. An internet connectivity provider is not responsible for the contents they transport. That's the reason why these dark web places still can exist, because the AT&Ts of this world that carry the internet traffic are not held liable for that. Now, why do I say that? At the moment, there is obviously a debate of the exact same law with respect to these foundational models, right? And obviously, their argument is, well, we do provide a safe tool if a user of ours abuses this and misuses this to produce nefarious outcomes. It's their responsibility, not ours, right? The person that sells you a lovely set of forks and knives for your Thanksgiving wonderfully arranged dinner table will not be held liable for the fact that you, if you don't like your uncle, can threaten him with that fork, or even worse, cut his throat with that knife, right? That's you who committed that crime that's going to be held liable. And we're going to see the exact same liability debates in and around that. And I do not know how that debate will be settled. There are good arguments, by the way, to make some of the carriers responsible for their content. As an example, in news media that is like that, what is often described as so-called legacy media, they need to obey to a certain libel law, law paragraphs. And they cannot simply write whatever they want. They need to be truthful. They obviously have an ability to have their opinion, but if they outright lie, they're held liable. And by the way, this happened a number of times, most recently in the US. Now, obviously, from a perspective of such a newspaper publisher, they think that's a bit unfair. But, law is law. And us in society, we need to decide in which way we want to go. Do we want to let the providers of these foundational models go liability free? Or do we, because they're so fundamental technologies, want to say, you're, by the way, liable for what you provide here? And I do not know how that debate's going to be settled.
Yeah. Another question is, like you mentioned, FAA, how it regulates airplanes in general and the whole industry in general in US. What do you think about creating some sort of agency like that for regulating AI? And maybe also we should start investigating all those cases of failures with AI in the same way FAA investigates, right? To kind of build on these regulations and guardrails.
I could very well imagine that this is what's going to happen. And again, I pick up on the analogy of the Federal Aviation Authority. The Federal Aviation Authority was not created the year the Wright brothers took their first flight. It was created many moons later. And by the way, at the time, there were manifold airline companies. Or better say airline companies, manifold manufacturing companies for airplanes, early versions of it. Most of them have since ceased to exist because it became an ever more complex, more capital-intensive business. Not too dissimilar of what you already see happening in the LLM space. There were many LLM providers 2, 3, 4 years ago, but today there is a handful of worthy contestants. Just this afternoon, I had a discussion with one of the early providers in Europe called Alpha Aleph, that unfortunately took a bit of turn to the worst. They're not anymore as competitive as they were in the first part of that revolution. So to your point, right? Will that eventually maybe happen? I truly do hope so, because I think that we will all benefit from that. To give you an example, the other day we are just in the contracts expansion phase with one of our major customers, and them being in a regulated industry, they actually came back and sent me a multiple page long paper that I first thought, oh gosh, now the European Union AI Act hits me. It's going to be a bureaucratic monster, what I have to fill out, etc. And then I realized that actually is real smart what these guys did. These guys simply came to us and said, we love your system. We deploy it widely in our organization. For the next iteration, you need to be able to do 2 things. I simplify a bit, but it's literally down to this. Number 1, you need to provide end-to-end observability of whatever this system does within the context of our company. And by the way, we take responsibility for the fact that we provide you the data. We take responsibility that with the outcomes that we produce, we drive business. That's us. But between those 2 endpoints, that's you. That's your responsibility. And you need to be able to transparently lay out end to end what each step has done. I thought that fantastic, because the second thing they asked for, and by the way, you need to install a risk management system that A, documents this, and B, also makes transparent if there is a malfunction in that end-to-end chain, so that we have a system how to look at that over time and assess what happened. And by the way, 3, we think about exposing that to a third party to help us analyze that data. This is the nucleus of what you just spoke about, Vit, that eventually we might see something which is, again, nothing new. Any business has a yearly cycle of them completing their business accounts, and then an external auditor, maybe less so for small businesses, but for mid-sized to large businesses, it's compulsory in every jurisdiction, from east to west, that you need to have your books checked by an external auditor. And the external auditor checks your books, maybe not line by line, but does sort of a case-by-case analysis to see, have you done your bookkeeping properly? Why that? So that your customers, your bank, whoever you deal with, your suppliers, can essentially trust you as a business, that you do not suddenly go out of business without noticing, but you as a business are a sound counterparty. And I would very much favor such a system. Why? Because the value of what AI can bring to any enterprise is so big. We should not waste this opportunity by making it unreliable, and thus, because it's unreliable, creating a mess and creating damage that wipes away the positive elements of change in return for destruction and maybe even bankrupt companies.
Yeah, I like this idea also, because even for enterprises, especially because they have, I think, bigger responsibilities than individuals. But even at the individual level, like if I use Gemini or ChatGPT or something, they even label everywhere saying that don't really trust, verify all this information because it may hallucinate or something like that. So I think maybe business will start doing this first, and then it will come down to the consumer products as well, which will be good.
Yeah. Look, that's a bit like what you see sometimes in Britain. I believe that's where they often do that. You see some lovely Scottish whiskey advertisement, and then below it reads like "drink responsibly."
Right.
Right. It's about the same thing. So they say to you, "Go get wasted with our lovely whiskey." Oh, by the way, do it responsibly. So we're not reliable for the fact that you have a massive hangover tomorrow. And hopefully, if you have a hangover, you haven't driven your car, because if you would have, maybe you would have caused even more harm, not only to you, but to other people too. And the way they try to get away with is drink responsibly. That's about the same level, may I say, of taking the easy step. Right? Obviously, we want to do that. Obviously, we want to say you shall enjoy that whiskey, but you shall do it responsibly. But that's not enough. Right? If you let loose on human mankind a tool that has the propensity to change everything, you cannot simply step away of irresponsibly by adding a small note, oh, verify result. It could go wrong. That's in itself very irresponsible, to say the least. And again, the analogy, right? If Delta, American, Lufthansa, British Airways would print on their tickets, right? Thank you for flying British Airways. Oh, by the way, we could actually crash over the Atlantic. Right? Would you go and buy that ticket? No, you wouldn't.
Yeah.
You would not. Right? It's unacceptable. Why shall it be then suddenly, if it's unacceptable for an airline, why shall it be acceptable here? Right?
Yeah.
If you go to a doctor in a hospital and the guy essentially at the entry says, oh, by the way, maybe I will cure you, but maybe I will kill you. Would you go in and trust that doctor? No, you wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Right? So,
and instead, what they do, they put all these badges and certifications and labels, how safe they are, how certified they are, how they passed all these audits to build trust with their clients. That totally makes sense. Okay, so then there is also this additional piece to the AI LLM world called RAG, which is Retrieval-Augmented generation. So can you say a few words how it actually works for the listeners? And then also I have a question whether that tool or mechanism will help make LLMs more trustworthy.
Yeah. So think of it this way. Think of an enterprise. An enterprise is a composition of many IT boxes, right? An enterprise sells you something. So they might use a CRM. An enterprise will need to produce whatever they sell to you. So they might need a production system, an ERP. To be able to produce whatever they sell to you, they will need supplies. So they might need a supply system. Then let's suppose this is a company with a few hundred employees. They need some level of communication, collaboration. They need an HR system. They need a finance function. What I described to you is essentially kind of like a portrait value chain diagram of a company. And that is a combination of IT boxes. Maybe you have something from Salesforce for CRM. Maybe you have something from SAP or the likes for your ERP. Maybe you have Microsoft for collaboration. Maybe you have whatever finance and whatever HR system, right? Now, if you want to use LLMs responsibly in a company, too, as an example, thinking out loud, give a salesperson an ability to more swiftly and neatly interact with a customer request. What can you do? Option A, you take all what I just described, which is your company data, which is valuable, which also is to be protected, and expose it to the LLM. Now, obviously, that's not really secure, is it? Now, obviously, you're going to say, or some listeners can say, yeah, well, I can take the enterprise edition of say, OpenAI. Sure, you can. But again, and by the way, OpenAI is just one of the many providers, read their general terms and conditions carefully, that there is no backdoor there. Because in the moment there is logging, in the moment there is any training, your data is gone. Number one. Number two, LLMs are, as opposed to what many people believe, not cheap. They rest on GPU compute power. GPU compute power is about 10 times more expensive than the normal CPU, your normal notebook, right? So if that is a company that produces massive amounts of data, that can actually result into a massive bill. I'll give you a very specific example. A long-time customer of ours had the idea that for a part of their customer cases, it's a bank and they do lots of international payments, that all of these customer cases, instead of doing it quote, quote, traditional way, that is using traditional LLP and ML, machine learning techniques, they take all of these customer complaints and expose that to an open AI consumed through Azure. You know what the token cost per month is for that company? North of $4 million.
Wow.
Simply because of the size. Obviously, the OpenAI guys, the Azure guys, gonna cheer, right? But shall I tell you what that same cost is if you do that responsibly between CPU and GPU compute? Instead of 4 million, it's going to be roughly about 400,000 or 500,000.
Wow.
Why?
That's a big difference.
Massive difference. Why? These are long-threaded emails with lots of chunks in it, as in, footers. I send it to you, you send it to the CFO sends it to someone else. So the lengthy emails, where the core element that describes what went wrong with the payment is just comprised of maybe 2, 3, 4 lines out of maybe 50 pages if you would print out that PDF. Now, it does not make sense to expose all of that to an LLM just for those 2 lines. So here comes the RAG system. A RAG system is a so-called Retrieval-Augmented Generation system. That is, in the first step, you take all of these data sets and you ingest that into what I term now a search system, a vectorized embedded search system, right? Ideally, you do it, that's a bit technical now, in a hybrid fashion. That is, you have both the traditional keyword search as well as a bit of semantic search. And in that sense, you have a hybrid search. But for listeners, simply think it's a search engine. If you have at ingestion time also applied a couple of machine learning, NLP, key entity extraction steps, you already have, as an example, in these lengthy emails, stripped away all of the repeated footers. You have stripped away all of the froms, tos, etc., and written a bit of that into the metadata. So you have boiled down the document to just what is relevant, the description of what went wrong. That you have indexed. Now comes, as an example, the call of that CFO that is angry that his payment or her payment hasn't yet been transacted. So what happens? You go and let the system work out, these are the couple of elements in that lengthy chain. And you only expose those elements to an LLM to, as an example, craft an answer that you can send automatically back to the customer. Yes, we have recognized the fact that there is an issue with your payment. Here are the possible next resolution steps that we're going to undertake for you. And it's going to be resolved, say, tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., right? And then you use an LLM more responsibly. You only use it for what it's really good at: text recognition, text generation. And you leave to the retrieval stack what the retrieval stack is good for: management of large arrays of data, including the enrichment of those data sets, the finding of those 2-3 snippets that really contain the relevant piece, and only those pieces are exposed to the RAG system. So prompt goes to the retrieval piece takes out those segments that are relevant, exposes it to the LLM constructs an answer, you go and check and verify that answer, and that is the answer that you provide then to an internal agent or maybe even directly to the customer. That, in very short, is how a retrieval-augmented system works. And it helps to balance out cost and efficiency. It helps to balance out scale. It helps to balance out and find optimal ways to produce these tangible results.
And so yeah, that covers not just trustworthiness or accuracy of the data, right? But also all these other aspects that how people can optimize their um, analysis of data, if you
Yep.
will, or something like that. Yeah. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to go into the future a little bit and say and ask you, do you see any of the maybe potential risks that we should be preparing for with using LLMs, AI in general, maybe with RAG, maybe there are something in works to make it more optimal or better or safer. Anything there?
Well, there are many companies working on that, right? There are companies working on providing entire guardrail setups. I know of a company here in Switzerland, Lacera, that was just recently picked up by Checkpoint to make it available as a security feature in the Checkpoint software suite. Good stuff. I know of a lot of other companies that, as an example, work in and around synthetic data sets. So you mimic operationally relevant data sets with synthetic data to not expose anything relevant to an outside LLM. There are companies that do these kind of like personal identifiable information obfuscation systems. There are companies, I know one that's called Trustwise that provides an entire guardrail, observability, and compliance stack, right? Where you can, from the outside, monitor how good your rack system performs. So, like any younger industry, that's, I think, not yet fully settled land, if I may say. But there is a lot of good activity that you see left, right, front, center of people cognizant of the fact that we need to kind of like build up a reliable way of using these modern techniques to drive enterprise value.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's good. Somebody's working on all these things. I always think about kind of like antiviruses. They became popular when all these security vulnerabilities and issues started happening in the early
Yep.
days of internet. So we need some player like that. So yeah,
We sure need some of these large antivirus companies like Kaspersky and others. Absolutely, Checkpoint. Yeah, also for this.
yeah.
And frankly speaking, I introduced this talk on my side with talking about that Anthropic AI hack that happened right over the
Hmm.
weekend. I guarantee you, this will drive adoption of such security tools.
Yeah, we didn't quite get into the vibe coding and how people rely more on this, and it became so popular in the last like 6 to 8 months or so. There are a bunch of companies that providing services like this, and the more I talk with people, the more scary it gets because more and more people saying that you cannot trust it, you have to verify it, it creates more issues or, not, or whatnot. Do you have any opinion on vibe coding?
Um, Vibe coding, I think, is one of the bigger fallacies of the current era. Let me explain. By the way, we do this type of stuff internally at our
Mm-hmm.
company as well. We did lots of tests. So, as an example, we're just revamping our entire front end stack. Why? Because after 2 3 years, we learned a few tricks more than we knew about 2 3 years ago. How these interfaces are used in an enterprise setup, and that goes way beyond the simple chat interface where you type in a question and get out an answer. But it goes into entire workflow
Mm-hmm.
orchestration setups and all of the escalation scenarios you need to think through, and much more. So guess what? We did wipe code this initial draft of an front end. We literally got overnight success. Then we started to look at the code. That code was to a large extent not understandable. It was good code, but it was not understandable for our software engineers. Now you can claim we have only mediocre software engineers. I don't believe so. Or you can say maybe AI found better ways to code, alternative ways, which is fair. Well, maybe it did. But here's the problem. Our code needs to pass, as an example, the entire security onboarding for those regulated industries. Now, in
Mm-hmm.
those setups, you have existing systems that do that for you. They're not vibe code ready. So if I ship that code to these guys, it will reject the code because it is not according to the standards they would accept. Now you can go and say, okay, then change those standards. Eventually it will happen. But that's only half the thing, because the person, and that's the two elements that we learned out of our exercise over the last 12 months. The two key learnings are, number one, to really produce executable, robust, performing code that you can use in an operational environment, you need extremely experienced software engineers. Right? In the moment you have, say, a senior or a junior software engineer, they will not get there. Some of that code will look nice and will be operational. But in the moment it's about some edge condition, it will fall apart. Now, if you don't test that extremely well, you will not notice that. So effectively what you just did, you built up massive legacy. And you did so doubly because, 2 years down the road, with the current hype crazed job market, that software engineer that produced this piece of code might not longer be with you. Or better say, the software engineer that vibe coded this piece of code.
Yeah.
Who is understanding that code then? No one. The vibe code engine will have iterated many iterations. The software engineer is no longer there. So suddenly what do you have? Legacy code.
Yeah.
Massively so. So at the moment, there is a massive buildup of unsecured, outright dangerous software code introduced into operational setups by folks that are surely well intended. I don't say they're bad intended, but that have not overlooked the whole thing. And if you now go back and start to instill discipline in the way you execute these vibe code elements, guess what? You suddenly realize that as opposed to what the vibe code websites try to promise you, 100+% productivity gains, the net real productivity gain is still noticeable, but it's maybe in the 20, 30, 40%.
Yeah.
Right? And not in the 100+%. Which is still good, by the way, right?
Yeah.
Average productivity gains in Western societies over the past 20, 40 years was at max 2-3% per annum. So if you have suddenly a 30-40% jump, that's still massive, and we should be happy with that. We don't even need to go for the 100%. If in return we don't build up legacy, that's going to bury our own software stack in 2 years down the road.
Yeah, it's like with anybody, there is a saying, right? Slow is fast. So if you build your code very fast, you don't check it, you don't have pull request reviews and proper testing and things like that, you will eventually slow down and be buried in this legacy code and code debt and things like that.
Yep.
I totally agree with that. Yeah, 30% is huge. I know in the organization I work for, we have engineering teams who use this like copilots and things like that to generate some code, some tests, and it's helping productivity. But we still do those thorough reviews where multiple people look at the code, make sure everybody understands what it does, and things like that. I think that's a very important thing to pay attention to. Yeah. So there are a lot of AI startups these days, and some people enter into the regulatory, highly regulatory industries and things like that. We kind of touched on it in the very beginning, but maybe let me ask you this: do you have any sort of advice for those young companies to watch for, and what risks and things like that? Maybe word of caution from your experience.
I would say the following, right? In the moment you go to a regulated industry, and let's make it plain and clear, 75% of our economy is in one way or the other regulated. Right? If you look at it, 75% plus of our economy is regulated. Whether it's food, obviously regulated for food security reasons, whether it's transport, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's construction. Essentially, all of the industries are regulated. There's not even a question whether or not you go for regulated industries. everybody who does AI, with one or two few exceptions, right? Consultants are, funnily enough, often not regulated, right? Yep, it's one of those less regulated industries, or not regulated industries. By the way, which makes it dangerous because then consultants coming out of an unregulated industry try to teach people who are operating in regulated industries how they need to do their business. That's a clash. Little side note. So, well, I recommend to folks, be cognizant of the fact that you already, in most cases, operate in a regulated industry, number one. Number two, it's wise choice to maybe go and look at the level and the detail of regulated industries. What I want to say with that, if you are an AI startup that goes, say, after pharma, after life science, as an example, pharma development, right? Drug development. You're not going to get past very far unless you have very deep pockets. Why? Because the Food and Drugs Administration will be extremely tough to get by. Why? Because at the end of the day, there are lives depending on that assessment. Right? Yeah. So while the riches might be big, the price that you can win potentially might be big, it is also a very lengthy and tough process. So if you want to make sure that you get into the money as a startup, which is always important, it might be worthwhile, instead of going after that market, maybe go after a market first that has a bit of lighter touch regulatory setup. As an example, go and optimize, I think out loud, some logistics operation, right? Where how, directing, customers to parcels, or direct, lorries that deliver those parcels. Then going after the crown jewel of, as an example, an FDA-approved biopharma drug discovery startup, right? So, go and kind of like cut your teeth there and then kind of like gradually move up the ladder. That's maybe not the, hey, let's go to unicorn level tomorrow, but it's maybe the more pragmatic step-by-step approach.
Yeah, that's a good advice. Thanks for that. And then, so we're almost at the end here. I usually ask like three quick questions at the end. And the first one is, how do you define innovation in a few words?
Thinking beyond your horizon of experience. That is, go and think about something that is not yet here, something new. There was a time before Einstein came up with his magic formula, E equals mc squared, right? And there was a time afterwards. In the moment he crossed that horizon of experience, he invented something truly new and unique. That's, for me, innovation.
Okay, great. And the second one is, which one innovation from all the history you think changed the world the most?
The telegraph.
Telegraph. Okay.
Why?
That's a good one.
Why? You and I speak now like it is an everyday thing. You're on the East Coast of the US. We speak together in real time. 200 years ago, a mere 200 years ago, that conversation here would have taken more than a decade to accomplish. Why? Any one of your questions to me would have taken 2-3 months to come from the East Coast all the way to Switzerland through sailing ships, later steamboats, and then back, right?
Yeah.
It would have been a very fluent conversation, by the way. Right? Because in between me getting the next question is give or take 5 to 6 months. The back and forth between Zurich and, say, New York on a steamship. And then came the telegraph. And if you go back, there is a wonderful book that's called The Victorian Internet from Tom Standage. Within about 8 years, they created, at the time, roughly around 1850, says something like that, they created the first worldwide internet, the telegraph. And suddenly the distance from Zurich to New York was not anymore 5-6 months, but 5-6 minutes. And that compression of time and the impact it had on our economies, my view has been of a much deeper impact than what we have seen over the last 30 years the ability to shave off a couple of seconds, or the ability to not only talk on the phone, but see you live on a video screen.
Yeah. No, that's a good one. I like it. And the last one is, which one of the technological things, devices, or software that we use today, we will be laughing at 10 years from now?
Large language models.
Okay. We can laugh today already, right? Kind of.
Yeah, true. True. But I think they will be looked at as the dinosaurs of the early age of AI. Because what you effectively do, you throw massive amounts of compute at what effectively is a probabilistic autocomplete. Right? That what an LLM essentially is.
Right.
And that is neither very intelligent. Surely it's artificial, right? But it's neither very intelligent nor it's very far reaching. But I truly believe what you now at the moment see some labs worldwide work on those alternative means. You will see, as an example with that, and a bit of a mixture of maybe quantum computers around the corner, you will see a totally different world in terms of what's computationally possible. Right? The next such conversation that you and I have might be that we are kind of like in an avatar world that looks and feels like you'd be sitting literally next to me. Right? And it might be a world whereby many of those, as an example, enterprises that today I talked about, that port value chain model, will be composed entirely differently, because suddenly you have autonomous agents that start to, as an example, source parts or do stuff of a value chain, whatever. Right? So I think we probably will laugh about LLMs in the near future.
Yeah, I can see that. Definitely. All right, Dorian, thank you very much for your time and talking to me.
Thank you so much. That was a real pleasure to have you. Thank you very much to be on your show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye. Thank you for tuning in. I hope this conversation gave you fresh ideas and inspiration. If so, please share it with your friends and colleagues. Don't forget to follow or subscribe and leave a quick comment. It helps more people discover this episode. See you next time.